I'm Bud Hansen, and I'm quite elderly now. I'm in my mid-80s. When I was just a young lad of 18 years old, just out of high school, when I was drafted into the service, and I took my training down in Fort Knox, Kentucky, for 16 weeks, and I become a reconnaissance specialist. And let me tell you, I've never been away from home before, and so that was a new experience for me. So I went down to Fort Knox, Kentucky, had specialized training, become a
The reconnaissance
specialist, and was sent overseas. We landed in England and then on to Le Havre, France, where I became a member of the 7th Armored Division and the 87th Reconnaissance Squadron. My job was to find out where the Germans were, what they were doing, and bring that information back, and then we could advance according to what we found out. We spent from the middle of December until the end of January in the Battle of the Bulge, and finally we defeated them there, and then it took us several weeks to get across the plains to the Rhine River at Bad Godesberg. And we sat at Bad Godesberg for about a week watching the Germans across the Rhine. As they went across the Rhine, they blew the bridges, and so there was no way for us to go across. Finally, they found a bridge at Remagen that was still intact, and most of the troops went across the Rhine. And as we fought the Germans for several weeks, they finally had no place to go because the Russians was coming from the west, from the east, going to west. And so the war finally calmed down, and a lot of Germans had surrendered in that area. On the way up north, for this particular thing that we were going up there for, we run on to the Bergen-Belsen death camp. And we were the first to go in through the gates. And what we found there was something we just couldn't hardly imagine. Of all the dead people and the people with ready to die that had all these various diseases. And we found a gal on a pile of dead people who was almost ready to die. And myself and another buddy of mine took her off this pile and got her some help. And pretty soon the British came through the gates and took over, and our job there was done. And because we had to still go up north to get our mission to contact the Russians. But that's another story. And but the war was over for us, and we went back down south to meet with the American forces.
What'd you think when you heard the war was over?
Well, naturally, everyone thought about going home right away. We were put on a point system. If you had a family, you had so many points. If you had been overseas longer, you had so many points. And being that we hadn't been overseas that long and it didn't have many points, we had to stay over as occupational forces. They had to have somebody there because the Germans were all without homes. The country was completely in ruins because of the bombing. I finally got to come home in the spring, early summer of 1946. I really enjoyed my time after the war because we were settled in an area where it was beautiful, and during that time I was given a furlough to Paris. We spent 10 days in Paris. As soon as I got back from Paris, there was another leave for Denmark. I saw a lot of country while I was over there, and enjoyed that extra year that I spent over there. You know, years after I came home, I saw in a paper one day where this Jewish gal that had been a prisoner of Bergen-Belsen was going to be speaking in Cedar Rapids, and when I read this in the paper, boy, things started to come back, and thought about this lady that we had taken off that pile of dead people, and took her and got her some help, and she was going to be in Cedar Rapids to give a talk. And I got her on the telephone, and I told her that I was one who helped open up Bergen-Belsen. And she just thought, wow, here I've been telling people about the death camps that she had been in and all, and a lot of people didn't believe all that stuff. And so she was excited that here she found a person who opened up the death camp that she was rescued from. And after her talk, I went down to meet her, and she was so happy. She still claims that I am the person who rescued her at Bergen-Belsen. It's a nice thing that we got to see each other after the war.
Okay, so when you found out that you were coming home, how'd you feel?
Well, you know, as I was telling you, I was in this area with the military police, and from there we went to another town or another group, and stayed for a couple days, and then we were in Le Havre ready to come home, and we looked out into the bay, and here stood this same boat that we come over on, and that's the one we went back on, and we were sick of that. I got back to New York, and I was headed on a train to Chicago, Fort Sheridan, and that's where I was discharged. My family was waiting for me, and my girlfriend, and Bernice, my wife today after 65 years. We met and hadn't seen each other for a couple of years. So that was very important, and BC and I was married in January 1947. A year later, I still am studying the war in Europe, and I have written a story of my life from the time that I was born until the time to the present. And a lot of the story of my life has to do with my time in the service, which I can't say that I really enjoyed all of it, but the time I spent in the service is very important to me. And I don't regret going into the service. If I had my choice, I probably wouldn't have gone, but back in 1944, you didn't have a choice. But the climate of back in those days, people are different back then than they are today.
What was the most difficult part of the war for you?
Well, I would say that the most difficult time was when we were in Belgium during the Battle of the Bulge. During a winter time that was the worst winter, they say, that they had in Belgium in over 40 years. My combat boots froze on my feet. I had to go to the hospital. The boots had to be cut off because they were frozen on my feet. And I probably the worst time was when my feet were frozen, and it was hard for me to get around.
Okay, so our questions were answered somewhat indirectly.
They weren't very specifically addressed, but I still think they were adequately answered.
So he specified how he actually felt about being drafted.
That was one of the problems we had with his answers, is that he didn't really explain how he felt. It was more like he explained just what happened. But it's partially our fault that the questions weren't answered the way we wanted, because we weren't there for the interview. So he did, however, have some very interesting stories to tell.
We also learned that he served in the reconnaissance, mostly in Belgium, and that his job was to not actually fight, but more to watch the other side and figure out what they were doing and such.
It was kind of the same deal for the extra 3 questions. We got answers, but again, it was very indirect. We kind of have to pick apart what we need from it.
So what we did get from it was what he was doing when he first heard that the war had ended. He also answered how he felt when he was coming back home, as you saw, so with all his family.
Alright, handling suffering and loss. In my opinion, not much has really changed since then about how people handle things like that. It can be hard for people, but eventually they get through it.
I think that now there's maybe slightly less suffering and loss, but otherwise it's mostly the same.
I think that life now is very different from during the war. There really aren't any propaganda posters anymore. You don't really see those. I mean, you might have people coming to schools, like advertising, join this army or join that, but not really posters anymore.
And they may have them and we may just not know about them.
Yeah.
They just aren't obvious now. And so now we aren't being asked to join the war quite as much.
Yeah, the draft is no longer in effect, so people don't have to join the army or anything if they don't want to.